Hi, welcome everyone. I would like to start off with a small experiment. So please take your left hand. It's very difficult to take photos, right? Your left hand, well, the back of your hand, make a fist. Put your finger on top of the fist and then turn over. That's to know if you're drunk or not. might be handy tonight. Push your wrist, tap 2 times, snap your fingers. Take a little bit of magic dust and blow. Don't blow too hard, because if you blow too hard, you won't have a coin. Well, if you take the coin like that, watch very careful, then you can throw it up in the air and it will become a clicker. So now we can start our presentation. Perfect. Applause before I even said something about Git. So the title of Git is You Don't Know Git. It was inspired by the books You Don't Know GS. I don't know a thing about Git, but I learned a few things along the way using it, and I hope to share a few insights. Let's turn that on. So I'm Damiaan, I'm from Belgium. I'm a magician in my free time, and I'm a developer. If you want to tweet, you can use @dampebe, and it will appear on the screen because I didn't turn off my notifications, or you can send me an email. If you search for Belgium, that's the small yellow dot on the map. That's not too far from here. That's, by the way, the only map which has the right sizes and so on. So I'm a developer. I work for other agencies. I work we take over existing websites. And I've been using Umbraco quite a lot since 2009, I think. I'm a certified master, I'm an MVP, and I'm a documentation curator. And the last part was what triggered me to do something, to do a talk about Git. Because Git is something which is pretty difficult, or not too difficult, but things get confused, people get confused pretty quickly. And I see a lot of people struggling with Git, because I do merge from time to time documentation from the Umbraco CMS, and people are struggling. So the problem with Git is it can be quite simple, it can be very complex. If you want to explain the simple part, you need 2 hours. If you need to explain the difficult part, it's like 5 hours. I'm going to do it all in 1 hour. If you think like there is something which I already saw, that's possible. I took everything from the internet. I put links on it. If you think it's a nice photo, it's probably free. It's from Unsplash, Pixabay, whatever. Links are there. If you are looking at Git, then Git says it's an open source, distributed source version control system. That's a mouthful. And it's designed to have very large and very small projects. So it can handle any type of versioning for your code. It's easy to learn, it's fast, it's better than all the rest, and there are 3 important things, which is cheap local branching. That's the first part, we will discuss that. It has staging areas. Ever heard of them? And it has multiple workflows. But we'll come back to those 3. If you want to look again at this explanation, the gitscm.com website is probably where you want to be for a lot of information. So by raise of hands, who's using Git already? Oh, okay, bye. Who's planning on using it? A few, perfect. And who's not using it but would like to know more about it? Well, for the few who didn't dare to raise their hand because they're not using it yet, or they are not able to say that they are not using it, they're not alone. Because 40% of the companies have concerns when they are looking into Git or want to migrate to Git, which is a lot. And the biggest concern is the learning curve. So if you get confused, then you need some way to start. For the few who haven't been able to work with Git, try.github.io is probably a great starting point with a few things where you can start with a handbook, cheat sheets, and so on. There is, by the way, a very big difference between GitHub and Git. Git is the version control system, like we just discussed, and GitHub is a commercial offering where your Git repository might be hosted. A lot of people tend to confuse those two. There's a big difference between Git, a versioning system, and on the other hand, a place where your code can stay. GitHub is very known for hosting free projects, for open source projects, like the Umbraco CMS and the documentation. So if you look at the documentation of Umbraco, that's hosted on GitHub. Well, the documentation is hosted on GitHub, the website isn't. If you click the edit this link button on the documentation, you'll end up on a page on GitHub where everything is written in Markdown, which is a format for having text. And the documentation can be changed on the GitHub website, which is pretty easy. If you want to help us out and make the documentation better, you're able to do so using the GitHub website. And at the bottom of the page, you can add a message and then propose a file change. That's not too hard. If you have a GitHub account, you can improve the Umbraco documentation, afterwards we will be doing a few things, but we'll explain that later. But from your part, that's all you need to do. Sometimes someone is very eager to help out, and we got 120 requests, pull requests, and we had a lot of work to merge them in, which was an awesome job, but sometimes tooling helps. You don't need to use the github.com website. So there are a lot of tools. I could have 15 slides with tools. That's not interesting. If you don't use Git a lot, SourceTree is probably the easiest one to start with. SourceTree is very simple, and you don't really need to know Git before you are able to use Git. I like Git extensions a lot. It made me understand Git much more. Git extensions is a little bit more powerful. Or if you like, you can use this command line. And to be honest, every IDE, like Visual Studio Code, have integrated Git commands. So you don't need any other tool, but I tend to use everything a little bit combined. Like commit in Visual Studio, don't think about it, and then use Git extensions to do other things. And then sometimes go to the CLI and command line and type something. So let's start with a few simple things about Git. If you have your folder with your source code, that's the working directory, you can mark a file as being something which you want to keep, but are not there yet. That's called the staging area. So you can stage files, you can stage multiple files together, and make and prepare something which you are able to commit to. If you are able to commit, say like this is a new version of my source code, then you call a command which is called git commit. Makes sense? And it's stored in a repository. So we have three terms. We have the working directory, the staging, and a repository. And we will be using them quite a lot. If I talk about commits, that's every version which is based upon a previous one. A commit is something which is a new version in your repository. You have multiple places where you can store your code. That's a stash, which is something temporary. It's a working directory, which we just saw. It's a staging area, which you know by now also. And then you can have multiple repositories, where you can store source code. It can be on your local drive. It can be somewhere else, and that's called remote repositories. If you want to work together, then you need multiple repositories or access to one repository. So we'll talk first about pull and push, which are two very common things in the Git world. Imagine you have the GitHub repository of Umbraco CMS. The Umbraco CMS lives somewhere. In this case, it lives on GitHub. If you fork it, then you have a new remote on your own GitHub account. So you can do that, by the way, with the documentation too, which is much more important than the CMS probably. But if you have the Umbraco CMS and your CMS, that's a copy. But then you can't work on it with your tooling. You need to live it on your computer, and that's called a clone. If you have added a few commits on your clone, on your local computer, then you can push things back to your fork. Or you can pull from your fork if you are working together on this one fork. Or if you go home, you can pull the source code again down from your fork. So you can push code to your fork and pull code from your fork. But in the meantime, while you are working on a feature, things happen at Umbraco. They tend to have more developers working on the CMS than you might imagine, and things are moving forward. So sometimes you want to take things from the Umbraco CMS, from the pink first, upper, what is it, left for me, right for you, something? Yeah, other way around. So you can take the latest commits, and that's called a pull too, because you are pulling in from an upstream. So an upstream is a repository which is living upwards the stream of the versions, and your origin is your own code. When you are ready with changing everything, changing a bunch of documentation, making a new feature, you can request a file change to Umbraco, and that's called a pull request. That's not too hard. If you have remote repositories, like in this case, your local repository is linked to multiple remote repositories, which is first the Umbraco CMS, your own clone, the fork of the Umbraco CMS, but you could work together with other people. For example, in this case, I'm working on the other origin of the Umbraco documentation, but at the same time, I connected to the repo of Jan, and Jan was working on something else. And I can see everything in the version 3, and I can see where things are coming together and are going apart. And that's called a branch. That's something else that hasn't to do anything with real trees, but the name comes from that. So a branch is something very, very important in Git. In the past, we couldn't make branches in SVN as easy as we do today, because they made a copy. A branch in Git is only to to have a few commits on a new feature, a new version, a hotfix, something, and they store only the changes. So if you have 2 lines of code changed, and you make a branch of it, you have 15 commits for these two lines of code. These 2 lines of code will be stored in this branch for that feature. But you can switch to a hotfix. Do a hotfix for a production website. And that's where you want to work with branches. So it's not only to work together, it's also to make sure that your own code is divided into the right parts. You can build on a feature for weeks and in the same time help out your customer and commit to the branch of the production. So having context switches is very important. Having branches to test is very important. I do tend to make branches to test something out and then ditch the branch, or leave it around for a year or two, and then go back, search, like, I did something, I tried out something someday, but it doesn't need to be in my branch, in my main development. And it's very cheap, like I said. If you have a few lines of code changed, it's only storing these few lines. So Git is storing with each commit the changes against the previous version. It's not storing a complete copy. You have only a few lines which have been changed if you change a few lines. And with that, you need to understand one concept very well. It's Git head. What's the head? Head is the current branch. The current branch where you are working on. If you change context, if you go to a production branch, you have a new head. If you go to feature branch, you have a new head. If you add a commit, you have a new head. The head is a current branch, the last commit where you are working on that moment. We'll come back, we need this later on. There are a few things when you have branches which you need. The first one is the most and best known, that's a merge. A merge is something where you have a master branch, which is a very common name to have the most important branch, which is mostly linked to production. You have a master branch, you have a feature branch, which you started at a certain moment in time, and then you want to throw everything together. So that's a merge, that's English, makes sense for most of us. If we do merge in Git, we create a new commit. In this case, it's the commit H. That's a very straightforward way of working with different versions, and makes a lot of sense to go back into history and to be able to work on the master branch while you're working on a feature branch without messing around with a lot of code. A stash we already discussed. I'm not going to show it. Try it out. It's if you want to go back to clean working directory, that's probably something which you want. A stash will never be pushed to your remote. That's the idea. A stash is something which you keep local. A branch is something which you can push. And then I found out pretty lately something very interesting, and it's called work trees. These are a kind of branching within the same repository, and you can make sure that you have in the same repository multiple active branches. That's pretty easy if you want to compare files, if you want to check out production and match it to some staging environment which you are developing against. The only command line, well, there is a command line, but tools sometimes offer a GUI interface. So if we, in this case, make a work tree, add B is for the branch name from dev v7 v8 v7 folder, then I get a folder called v7. I'm still in the dev v8 branch, but if I then switch directories to the v7 folder, then I switch branches. So you have multiple checkouts in the same repository. I think that's very handy. You don't need a new clone, which with an Umbraco project can take a lot of time, and certainly if you have a slower computer. And in this case, it's pretty easy to get the same in the same repository, different kinds of active code. If you're working with Git, the question is, what's your production? What is staging? What is things like that? And there are a lot, really a lot of ways where you can use Git and different approaches. One of the easiest if you are working alone, and if you aren't using Git, then this is probably what you want. It's a master branch, and every time you think like, I'm almost done, or I'm done, this is what I need, then you create a new commit, you push it to your repository, which can live on GitHub, Bitbucket, VSTS, DevOps, whatever. But that's something very simple, but it allows you to have different versions, and you can go back into history. It doesn't have to be complicated. On the other hand, if you need something more, in 2011, Vincent Driesen came up with wrote a blog post, and he became pretty famous for that one. And he came up with something called Git Flow. Git Flow is a way where you have a master branch which resembles your production, where you have your development branch, and your development branch can contain alpha features and can contain tested code, but it's not your production branch. You can work with several people together on your development branch, but you don't want to commit always to your development branch. That's where feature branches will come in. So feature branches will start from the development branch, and once they are ready to be merged, they can be merged back to the development branch. On the same note, the master branch still exists and is still containing your production code. If you know what's online, then you know what you can patch. So that means if you have something to hotfix, you can start from the master branch, make a hotfix, and if the hotfix is ready, you push it back to the master branch and the development branch, because the development branch started from the master branch, so you are having probably issues with your development branch too. And if you are ready to release, you start from the develop, and you finally, after bump fixes and a few quality control sessions, you can finally merge to the master and back to the development. So if you start with Git Flow, tools like SourceTree, for example, have a button where you can continue, where you can easily follow this pattern. Git Flow works pretty well, but if you use GitHub, for example, that might not always be the best way. So GitHub came up with their own flow called GitHub-flow. And what you do is you create PRs, pull requests, and the pull requests are merged back into the master branch. What they say is the master branch should always be deployable. And if you're ready for some feedback or help or need help, or if your feature is complete, then you should create a PR, a pull request. That's a kitten. I sent my slides to someone else and asked, what do you think? And he said, like, there are no kittens. So I had a slide with a kitten. So these were the easy parts of Git. What comes up next is a little bit more difficult. Sometimes you need something more, and you need to correct things which are not completely right. That's the ventilator closing. So, the first one is the amend. So, how many times did you have the feeling like, oh, just did a commit, right? Oh, forgot this one. Well, I never push at the same time. You have a very easy thing that's called git amend, and it adds things to your previous commit. So if I have a commit like this with one file and a very awesome message, add commit message, which is add dummy file, then I can add another one, and that's I can update the message. I check, in this case, the amend commit. Visual Studio has it, SourceTree has it. It's always somewhere different. Sometimes you need to hit the drop down, things like that. Pretty unuseful places sometimes, but in this case, it's a checkbox. And what happens, if I edit another commit message, I'd have the same commit, well, not exactly the same, because you will see that the ID is different, so it has another commit message, but the commit message and the files in the commit will be different. And then I can push to my remote repository later on. But like that, my commit has some meaning. The same with cherry picking. So cherry picking is where you have a commit and you think like, I need this commit in my production or my development branch too. And you can create a commit and cherry pick it to another branch. Pretty useful, very easy to do. And I've been using that a lot in the past when I was screwing things up, wanted to do something else. Then I created a new branch, went back, created a new branch, and started cherry picking from all the different branches where I knew I was doing and trying out stuff. And then I had my final branch where I knew, like, this is what I need. And I could continue from there. So cherry picking is a very easy way to start off with doing more complex things in Git. And then there's the rebase. Rebase is something which is not used enough, which people are very concerned about, where they have a lot of issues with. So imagine you have the same setup as before with the merge. A rebase would take the master branch and would put the feature branch, in this case, topic, onto the master branch. In most of the GUIs which you are using when Rebase is supported, not in Visual Studio, then in Visual Studio 2017, I think it is in 2019, then you need to understand what current branch or head is. But you already know by now, so if you do a Rebase master space topic, or you can use, of course, any GUI, then it will look like this. It looks much smoother than a merge. It's easier to understand because all the commits are coming after each other. That's something which should be used much more. There is one but. If you have pushed your feature to a public branch, you shouldn't be using this. You should never rebase on public branches, because if your branch comes into the hands of someone else, they will have a lot of issues with your branch because you rebased, and they have commits like it said A, B, and C, and you pushed A, B, and C new. So these are copies, and that's the reason why you never should rebase public branches, unless you are certain, 100% certain that no one touched this branch, but most of the time you don't want to do that. Most of the build servers, by the way, just check out the thing and don't care. I do it all the time on public branches, and I trick the build servers. So it works, but the golden rule is never do it. Because a merge is a non-destructive operation. It adds a new commit. That's the disadvantage, probably. It adds a new commit. And on the other hand, Rebase keeps a very clean, linear structure, and it doesn't add a new commit. If you do merge, most of the time you want to have all the commits in between, because you want to have some version history. You want to know why you did some things, and you want to see all the different subversions before you did a merge. But sometimes that's not necessary, and that's when a rebase is very good. If we do PR on the documentation or on the Umbraco CMS, we do a merge squash. We sometimes do rebase, if we can, not always. And a squash is taking out all the commits, merge them into one commit, and push it onto the branch. The same with the squash merge, that takes all the commits and put it on top of the latest master. It's very handy, keeps a very clean project history. Because imagine if you all do a PR, and we have 70, 80, I don't know how much people there are. You have some 70, 80 branches and commits and commit merges, where committed merge A, B, C, D, and so on. It's one hell of a thing to understand afterwards. If it would be 80 commits in the long run, that would be much more easy to understand. And that's why we do regularly squash merges if we think the version history is not important enough. Then there's an interactive rebase. How many have used interactive rebases? By raise of hands? Awesome. There are a few things which you need to know if you have interactive rebases. There's first a squash. That's not a melon, it's a command, it's a git command. And the git command says you want to meld the previous commit into your commit, but you don't want to. You want to keep the commit message. So, for example, if I have the commit with the star on it, that's the commit message, and I can take out the commit and move the message along. Got you. So the message has moved along. That's a squash. You have also fix-ups, which does exactly the same, but you don't have this message, just taking out the commit, right? We saw it. No one. Funny, right? I thought about that last night. Oh. It took me 15 minutes to get the PowerPoint right to have. So the fix-up just removes the. Come on. Oh, you're so generous. Thank you. So an interactive rebase is mainly doing a rebase, so putting all the commits on top of the master and doing a lot of things with it, like squashing, fix-up, throwing things together. So I have a small example. We have 5 commits in this case, where the first one, typo, perfect version history. You shouldn't have had a typo. That should have been in the previous commit. Or things like that. Oh, I added a file for that commit. So fix-up exclamation mark is a very known thing. If you start your commit message with it, it's marked as a fix-up commit. And then you have in the tool here an exclamation mark in the beginning. So what we do is, in this case, it's Git extensions. And Git extensions is, we do a rebase current branch. So that's the bold part on top. So current branch is my head, something which I want to, where I'm currently working on. And I want to rebase that on the selected commit. In this case, the origin/master. If I do that, I get immediately a very handsome text formatted layout, and I have all the commits here. The fix-up is already marked as fix-up because the tool knows I had fix-up exclamation mark in the commit message, so it knows it's a fix-up. And what is a fix-up? Didn't I have? Oh, and the last one, the typo should be a squash that should be merged into the previous one. And all the things which you can do with the commits, all the commands you can do with the commits are on the bottom. So if you do interactive rebase, then you can read what you need to do or what you can do. If you save and close the file, the moment it's closed, it will become from this, where we started, only this. So the 2 extra commits have been removed and are not there yet anymore. And you can easily push. The commit history is fine and nice to read for someone else. We all should be doing this. If you have commits with typo, and what else? I have a slide of that coming up. It's probably not necessary. You are not being nice to your colleagues if you do that. If you work alone, I don't care. But if you inherit something from someone else, where it says like typo, 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 it's a lot of reading work, mental work, which you need to do and which you shouldn't be doing. So please do interactive rebase. Well, that brings us to a more advanced part. You can do a lot with Git, really a lot. Git never throws something away. Never, ever, unless you tell it to do so. So that means that you can recover practically everything which you had. And if you don't want to recover, maybe you are working a long time on your repository and your repository is blowing up and is taking hundreds of megabytes, while if you do clone, it takes only a few megabytes. And there are 2 things which I would like to shortly discuss. The first one is a recovery. Recovery is something when your front-end colleague, not into Git, but using Git, and very happy to be able to use Git, checks out by double-clicking in source tree a branch, a commit. That's not a branch. And then he starts working on it, and he's very happy, but he has still no branch. So that means that he can add 2 more commits onto another commit without having a branch. Well, in fact, it's a branch, but it's a commit based on another commit. He should have said it's a branch. What happens if you change then from this commit, which has no branch specified, to a master branch, for example? Well, some tools say, like, hey, you should be doing it, blah, 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 blah. A simple developer working with Git, not knowing Git, will say, yes, okay. It's not yes or no, it's okay. In fact, it says, like, hey, you're about to lose a head without a branch. Are you sure? And it becomes this. As you can see, the 2 commits on top are disappeared. So if that happens and he comes crying to you, what do? You don't tell him, like, you need to do it again, because it's Git, and Git saves everything for you. Remember we talked about the heads? Well, every change of a head is recorded, is audited by your Git. So if you call the Git reflog command on Git, you will see all the changes of your head. If you do a commit, it changes. If you do a switch of branches, it changes. Every time you have a new head, it's recorded. And with the reflog, you can see clearly that we have the 6.5 and the E4 commits, that they are still there somewhere. We can reference to them. So if you have this situation, what you do, well, I did this one in command line, but you can do it in a lot of tools too. I do a checkout of the head -1. I could have used the 6.5 DF1182 instead of typing head at curly brackets 1. But I thought, let's try it out. It works perfectly. And then at the bottom, I say git checkout -b. I create a new branch. And like that, you have your 2 commits back. And that's a simple thing to recover lost things, or if you delete a branch. It's not deleting, it is changing your head to something else. Everything is still there, except if you have a backup which has the reflog, and the reflog isn't stored in the backup, then you have issues. Because if you don't have a reflog, you will be losing commits. And that brings us to maintenance. Because you could have a lot of commits which are not used anymore. Because a rebase does create a lot of commits which you don't use anymore. If you have a branch which is deleted, you don't use it anymore, you have a lot of commits dangling around. A little bit like these two guys. So, if you do a file system check, you get all the things which are still dangling around. In this case, it was pretty big thing. It had megabytes of data in the .git repository, the .git folder, which is the repository. So I did a git prune. And then I had a clean repository. I thought like, ooh, I have another big project. So I did a git prune, and there were still some commits dangling around. If that happens, there's something like git GC, garbage collection, and the garbage collection, if you do a file system check, and then a GC, and then a file system check again to see if they are gone. They're obviously not, but they are marked to be gone. Then you can do a prune, and then you will have back your clean state of your repository. So that's a very awesome thing, which you should be doing apparently every 2 weeks. Was 2 years. So I do have I think 8 tips to share with you before we wrap up. If you have a lot of commits like this, you can push the pull button, and then your computer starts working, trying to pull all the changes. For the Umbraco CMS, for example, it's horrendous. What you could do is right-click and say, reset current branch to this commit. It's done like that. It's the best thing I learned from Git extensions. Git extensions does that by default, apparently. You don't need to pull everything, because it's already in the repo. You just need to reset your branch to that commit. So reset current branch to that commit, perfect, awesome thing. If you start rebasing or doing interactive rebases, first create a branch. Because like that, you won't be able to lose commits like we just discussed with the reflog, and you don't need to recover and create a branch. If you create a branch up front, you can't lose anything, because there is still a branch pointing to the commits. So create branches as much as you like. It will help you become a better Git expert, because you don't lose a thing. And you can say like, let's try again. I did a wrong rebase. Oops, it wasn't the wrong branch. But if you created already a Git repo, you have the original commits still there, being able to recover. You know, we talked about staging. You should know that partial staging is a thing. It exists. So if you install a package, a NuGet package, it messes up your web.config, because all the spaces at the end of each line are different. Then what do you do? Do you commit the complete web.config? Well, I hope not. Because if you added 1 or 2 lines, go to these 2 lines and click the stage line button, or right-click and say stage. It works pretty well, and your commit history is only showing what you are really committing. And your colleagues will see and know what you are committing. And it's not like, oh, they changed the complete web.config. Very nice. What would have happened? Partial staging is very, very handy. Please use it. If you are into build servers and things like that, there are tools which calculate your version based upon your commit history. It's a website full. It's a 2-hour talk which I am planning to prepare someday. But it's something very, very awesome. You can hit Git version on the command line, and it calculates like, oh, this version 1.3.0-alpha.69. What? And it works pretty well with different build servers. TeamCity, Jenkins, whatever, name it. It's all there on their website, and it creates a semver, semantic version name. If you think about commit messages, please explain why you commit something. Going home, pirates may be coming, are not good commit messages. Been there, done, seen that. Super long commits doesn't work. Copy pasting the code which you committed doesn't make sense. So please think about why you made a commit. It helps understanding why you are committing the things which you changed. This I borrowed from Sebastian, our PR guru, pull request guru from Umbraco. You can create aliases. So if you do a lot of commands where you type every time the same thing, find the .git config file and add your aliases into that. It's useful, it helps, and it can, like for me, for example, I can use the PR-upstream alias and pulls down a PR, creates a new branch, pulls everything down, and I'm on that branch. Pretty awesome, and I need to do normally 1, 2, and 3 commands, so that's not necessary. If you want to make it much simpler, that's something which I see a lot of people struggling with, pull from the upstream. So if you have your branch and you want to do rebase, then you might need to rebase on the latest version of the documentation. You might want to rebase on the latest version of the Umbraco CMS. Don't do merge from the latest version, do rebase on the upstream version. So first fetch everything from the upstream onto your local Git repository, and then do a rebase of your current branch on the upstream of the latest version, in this case, the dev v8 branch. And if you really have no clue anymore, there's apparently a website which is called Oh Shit Git. I looked at it, and it's very, very well done. It says like, do you have the problem where that thing is happening? Then do this command. So you don't need to know Git to solve real issues. So 3 things which I learned and which I hope you really take away with doing this Git session is the partial staging is very, very important. None of my colleagues knew about that, and they are using stage all every time, and I'm struggling because they override things or they commit things which they don't need to commit. The interactive rebase, once you get the hang of it, it's very easy to understand, it's very easy to use, so please look into that. And remember, there is something about Git, the Git reflog, because if you see something in the backups referring to Git reflog, if you see issues with Git reflog, if you are losing things, know that the Git reflog is around and that you should go to your favorite search engine and type in reflog, and you probably have all the tools by hand, but then you at least know it exists. And with that, I want to close with a small quote, which is, don't be afraid to fail, but be afraid to not try. Because, to be honest, Git isn't that hard. It's not a hard learning curve. Even for the most difficult things, you should be able to use the Git. So with that, I would like to thank you all.
Any questions? Yeah.
It's not a question, but a common suggested tool. Your point about Git not forgetting anything. If you accidentally commit, say, credentials or connection strings, stuff like that, Git does remember. A really useful tool is a Python script called reflog. It will search your repository for high entropy strings. And if you have any public Git repositories, it's a useful tool to run and make sure you clean up all the commits that shouldn't be around.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions?
Other questions?
Okay, then there will be a break for 30 minutes, and both the Dream Corner and the Mindful Corner will be open. Thank you, and give again a big hand.